Hi everyone, I'm Dr.Animaction. In an effort to keep up a decent stream of new content as I relaunch and try to grow the channel, I've decided that I'll be releasing a video each week. Or trying to. Every other week I'll try to make a substantive, analytical video, and on the off weeks a smaller, more manageable video like a top 10 or a tier list. I won't really have any rules because it seems foolish to limit myself to one per franchise, as realistically, that's not a true top 10 list. It's more a ranking of the best from each. So instead, we'll look at everything from every series and put it all on the table. But enough of that, let's just jump into this week's list. The top 10-ish helicopters in 80s animated action. Also, one note before we start, I talk about realism a lot in this video, but for the record, I don't want or expect my 80s tunes to be realistic. There's just something about helicopters though. I think you'll understand later. Just bear with me. I'll try to start each of these lists with a dishonorable mention. And this week, that goes to Wrong Way, from Challenge of the GoBots. If I were just judging him on his vehicle form, then as an AH-64 Apache, he'd do pretty well. The Apache is one of the most awesome vehicles in the real-world Army's inventory, packed to the blade tips with weapons and technology. Wrong Way is like having that, but putting a pair of the Three Stooges in the front seats. He's inept in the worst ways and more detriment than help to the other Guardians. Just the absolute manifestation of wasted potential. I'll also briefly mention the GoBots flip-top here too, who may have made it to the actual list if they hadn't changed his helicopter from the toy's UH-60 Blackhawk model to whatever this is supposed to be. There are a few others worth a mention that didn't make my ranking. The Retaliator, Locust, and Dominator from the Deke G.I. Joe cartoon. The Retaliator especially is a cool-looking helicopter, but that claw ruins it for me. It's a cool play feature on a toy, but no possible way. And the Dominator? Pick one. Armored enough to be a tank? Or light enough to be a helicopter, because you're probably not going to have both. And the Locust is just a flying egg, so I'll pass. 10th place is a tie that goes to, well, not really helicopters, but helicopter-adjacent pieces of equipment. The Battlecopters and Annihilator helipacks from G.I. Joe, and the Hornet from Centurions. And any other time you see any kind of backpack helicopter or helicopter type thing with no tail rotor. That's just not how rotary wing aircraft work. You either need something to fight the centrifugal force of the spinning rotors, or you need to be able to handle spinning uncontrollably until you pass out, assuming you make it off the ground in the first place. Just plain no on these. So in 9th place we've got another tie, because these two particular helicopters are pretty similar in form. The Ecto-2 from the real Ghostbusters, and the Cobra Fang from G.I. Joe. You can even throw in the Skyfire from Rambo: The Force of Freedom if you want. I know at first glance they may not seem that similar, but hear me out. They're all essentially gyrocopters. They're not really designed for combat or transport or anything else useful besides scouting. Yeah, the Fang has missiles, but considering how little weight something like that could carry, I wouldn't expect much of a bang from those. Plus, with the exposed pilot, someone with a decently strong arm and ready access to a rock could take any of them out. Oh, and did I mention I used to be a helicopter mechanic in the Army? Yeah, I was, so I'm pretty hard to please in this category. 8th place is another tie, of sorts. It goes to Chip and Wolo's advanced recon helicopters from the Vehicle Force Voltron. Mostly I'm putting these here because helicopters in space just wouldn't work. Jets, sure, because they have directional thrust. Even the cars and submarines on the Vehicle Force have jets in multiple directions. That's fine in space. Fire a propellant one way, travel the opposite way. Helicopters need a pressure differential of air above and below the rotors to move, and, well, no air in a vacuum. You know, like space. So yeah, they're completely impractical. But in Voltron form, he uses their rotors as pretty awesome spinning blade weapons, so they get points for that. 7th place on my list goes to the Switchblade from Mask. It gets this high on the list by not being as impractical or useless as the other helicopters we've covered so far, but only makes it this high by not being very aerodynamically plausible. This is mainly because of the way the rotors open and close between jet and helicopter mode. For this to really work, then either the entire transmission that spins blades would have to raise and lower within the chassis, or the blades and their mechanical structure would have to raise on the drive shaft they're mounted to independently. Either way would require a lot of extra moving hydraulics, and would be brutal when it came to keeping the rotors in track. At best, Miles Mayhem would probably be toothless from the endless, violent shaking. Number 6 goes to the XH-1 Dragonfly from G.I. Joe. I know, listen. As iconic as it is, it still has some issues. My biggest issue with it is, and probably always has been, the canopy. The Joes are constantly shown in the series getting into and out of the Dragonfly while the rotors are spinning, and with a long single-piece canopy, that would just result in a lot of broken plexiglass and damaged blades. It's easy enough to see this in action using the toy, though you could argue that if the blades were in neutral at full RPMs, then they may not droop far enough to hit the canopy, but I still wouldn't risk it in real life. Then there's the fact that it has those thrust nozzles on the back of the main body, and they're pointed up toward the blades. Worst case, they're jets, and the heat will damage the blades and cause turbulence from the heat difference front to back. Best case, they're exhausts, and the same thing will happen, just to a lesser degree. For a fictional aircraft modeled after a real AH-1 Cobra, I think the differences don't work in its favor. Oh, and for those of you who are going to call me out for complaining about no tail rotors earlier, the Dragonfly has that spiky thing on its tail that the blueprints call a counter-rotating turbine, which would theoretically provide vectored thrust, so no issue there. Unlike my dishonorable mention, number 5 is a GoBot that actually makes the list. This time, the Renegade Twin Spin. This was a GoBot that actually had a pretty decent design. In robot form, he didn't look quite as stupid as some of the others, and in helicopter form, he looked just like a CH-46 Sea Knight. The fact that his rotors also became weapons on both arms was pretty cool too. They probably weren't the most convenient thing to have stuck to you when not fighting, but I guess evil robots just have to take the good with the bad. At least when he changed forms, he didn't look like a robot with a helicopter on his back, which is why Coptor didn't make this list. My number 4 pick goes to one of the GoBot's direct competitors, the Transformers, represented here by Sandstorm. Yeah, Sandstorm, not Springer. Not really a fan of Springer's design. Anyway, Sandstorm had a lot going for him, between the kind of Coast Guard representative paint scheme, the fact that his helicopter looked pretty close to a Sikorsky SH-3 Sea King, and not least of all that he had an entirely different third form. His dune buggy mode looked pretty cool, and mostly succeeded in hiding all of his helicopter parts. Except the tail rotor, which also sits over his head in robot form like one of those pinwheel hats. You know, these things. So he stays down here because of those couple of drawbacks. But hey, top 5 is still pretty decent. And that brings us to the 3 podium spots. Taking third on this list is the Nightingale from Ring Raiders. This is a jet-assisted medevac helicopter piloted by the series' best character, Jenny Gale. Not only is it the lone helicopter in a show full of jets, but it's also got a unique design that's not very real-world equivalent to anything, so that's cool. That, and the fact that the thrusters on it are directional and provide some ridiculous maneuverability, mean Jenny is competitive against any of the series' other aircraft. My only complaints are that the thrusters may be a bit too severe, with that extreme climb potentially being more than the blades can handle, and if they're too powerful, they can cause the aircraft to literally tear itself apart at too high a speed. Otherwise, it's a great design, flown by a great character. And now we get to the number 2 spot. Anyone have any guesses as to what the top 2 are? If you do, put them down in the comments. If you don't, I won't keep you in suspense. Number 2 is the Air Raid from Cops. The Air Raid is by far the coolest and most futuristic looking design on this list. The split side-by-side cockpit and police-like colors just look cool, and Bullseye was a pretty cool pilot character too. My only complaint with this one was the center of gravity. The rotors are a little too far back to not make the thing instantly go nose in the ground on takeoff, but other than that, I'm good with this one. I know I've probably taken a lot of fun out of several of the other helicopters on this list, but I promise that I do still love them all, and I am capable of suspending my disbelief. And that goes doubly for the Air Raid. Real quick, I want to throw in another honorable mention because I forgot him when I was putting this list together. I wanted to mention Blades from the Transformers. Honestly, if I'd remembered him earlier, or wasn't too lazy to rewrite my script, I'd have probably put him higher on the list. He's a combiner, a medevac, he turns into a pretty great looking version of a Bell UH-1 Iroquois, or, as it's more famously called, a Huey. I pretty much think he's close to a perfect design, so you know what? He's my number 1.5. My list, my rules. And that leaves us with our number 1. Or my number 1 at least. I'd be surprised if everyone hadn't already guessed it, but it's the Tomahawk from G.I. Joe. This is easily the best helicopter in 80s action cartoons. It has a great design with the desert camo pattern and the open crew bay. It's armed to the teeth and has a pretty heavy lift capacity. It's a multi-role aircraft, serving as a transport, a gunship, a medevac, a cargo hauler, all throughout the series. And Lift Ticket's a pretty cool character. Granted, he's got kind of an egg-headed figure, but still. My only real complaint with the Tomahawk, in fairness to the rest of the list, is the presence of a tail rotor. Counter-rotating main rotor heads mean that this isn't necessary, but that's it. The rest is a perfect vehicle, and I'm not just saying that because it's the closest thing to a CH-47 Chinook on the list. So that's it. My top 10-ish of the best helicopters from 80s action cartoons. Let me know what you think, what you'd change, or if you think I need to just treat cartoons as cartoons and stop considering the real-world implications in the comments below. On that note, thanks for watching. Like, comment, sub, etc., and check me out on my other social medias listed in the description. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned and stay tuned, as in cartoons. Later.